calm Boston, January 15, 1919. Just after noon on Commercial Street, a 50-foot steel tank lets out a sound witnesses described as a rifle shot, then a low, structural groan, and then it comes apart. A wall of dark molasses, 5 stories tall, rolls through the north end at 35 miles, per HR workers. Children, horses, buildings. It takes everything in its path.
21 people dead. A neighborhood submerged in 2 million gallons of industrial sugar.
Within days, cleanup crews were hosing the streets down with salt water from Boston Harbor. The evidence was dissolving into the tide, and the questions were just beginning. What exactly was in that tank? And why did it rupture so catastrophically? Excited hair is the thing nobody mentions in the disaster trivia version of this story. The molasses in that tank was not food grade. It belonged to the Purity Distilling Company, a subsidiary of United States Industrial Alcohol, and it was contracted to the U.S. government as feedstock for manufacturing munitions, grade ethanol.
Wait, munitions? As in weapons production?
Ammunition propellants specifically. Molasses ferments into ethanol. Ethanol becomes the solvent base for cordite and smokeless powder. The U.S. military was still wrapping up World War I logistics in January 1919, and USIA had government contracts. This was an industrial operation, not a syrup depot.
So when the wave hit, it was technically a weapons ingredient flood. Boston got hit by the precursor to a munition. That's an insane sentence.
Walk me through the temperature angle, because that detail about painting the tank brown to hide the leaks, where does that come from?
The day before the disaster, January 14th, the temperature in Boston was around 2 degrees Fahrenheit. By the 15th, it had climbed above 40 degrees, a swing of nearly 40 degrees overnight. That kind of thermal shock causes steel to expand and the contents to increase in pressure simultaneously. And the tank had been visibly leaking for years. Local children in the North End neighborhood used to collect the dripping molasses on sticks to eat. UCS response was reportedly to paint the tank brown so the leaks wouldn't show against the rust.
Their leak mitigation strategy was camouflage. Incredible liability management.
So this was also a race against the clock legally, not just structurally.
Exactly. The 18th Amendment, Prohibition, was ratified on January 16, 1919. One day after the disaster, Purity Distilling had been rushing to fill that tank repeatedly in the preceding months, because once Prohibition took effect, large-scale industrial alcohol production for anything resembling a beverage supply chain was over.
So they were panic stockpiling booze ingredients the day before Prohibition, and the tank exploded. The universe has a sense of irony.
Skeptical. But industrial alcohol wasn't banned by Prohibition that targeted beverage alcohol? Was USIA actually racing a legal deadline? Or is that a post hoc narrative?
It's a real distinction and worth flagging. Industrial ethanol production continued after Prohibition. But molasses-based fermentation sits in a gray zone. The same supply chain feeds both industrial and beverage production. And USIA almost certainly anticipated regulatory scrutiny and supply disruption. The stockpiling behavior is documented. The specific legal motivation is an inference from the timing.
So the official version is bad tank, warm day, too much pressure. But the tank was already leaking. The company was cutting corners, and it happened to burst the day before Prohibition. You can see why people wanted a bigger story there.
The Globe's front page the next morning, January 16th, called it a molasses tank explosion. Initial count was 11 dead and 50 injured.
Those numbers were badly wrong then. The final count is 21 dead and 150 injured. How long did that revision take?
Days as rescuers kept pulling bodies from the wreckage. The Globe also put property damage at $500,000 that first morning. That figure got revised upward too. Early disaster reporting in 1919 was essentially real-time guesswork.
11 dead, 50 hurt, and they were still finding people. That's not a miscount. That's a different disaster than the one they printed.
The wave itself explains why. Mass Moments puts it at 15 feet high and 160 feet wide when it hit. That's 5 stories of liquid moving across 2 full city blocks simultaneously. It collapsed a section of the Boston elevated railway structure overhead and crushed brick buildings.
Curious, wait. The elevated railway came down. So this wasn't just street-level flooding. It was structural collapse of the transit infrastructure above.
The molasses took out the tea. Boston has been mad about the tea ever since. Honestly.
Calm Red Cross workers, Boston firefighters, and Navy sailors from a nearby facility all converged on the scene. The Globe specifically noted their heroic work, and it was because extracting people from molasses is genuinely different from pulling them from water. The stuff thickens under pressure, which meant every struggle made it harder to get free.
How long did the cleanup actually run?
Days of active rescue, then weeks of cleanup, and they eventually hosed the streets with salt water pumped from Boston Harbor. The runoff turned the harbor visibly brown for months afterward.
So the harbor was just molasses soup for months. Imagine being a sailor docking in Boston that spring.
The legal aftermath was enormous. Over 119 plaintiffs filed suit against United States Industrial Alcohol, making it one of the largest civil litigation events in Massachusetts history at that point.
119 separate plaintiffs. Was this a coordinated class action or individual filings that got consolidated?
Consolidated before a court-appointed auditor. The case ran for 6 years and generated more than 3,000 witness testimonies before it was resolved. That's not a lawsuit. That's a small industry of litigation.
6 years and 3,000 witnesses. At some point, the lawyers were making more than the tank was worth.
Skeptical. So USIA had 6 years to construct a defense. What did they come up with?
They blamed anarchists. Specifically, they claimed an Italian anarchist had detonated a bomb near the tank. This was 1919, the absolute peak of the first Red Scare. Galleonist bombings were a real and documented threat, and USIA made this argument in court with a straight face.
The anarchists did. It was the 1919 version of a hacker in a basement. Just blame whoever everyone's already scared of.
And the auditors' response to that?
Rejected entirely. No physical evidence of an explosion, no blast pattern, no shrapnel distribution consistent with a bomb detonation. The auditor found that USIA manufactured the anarchist claim specifically because the Red Scare made it politically plausible, not because any evidence supported it. Colonel Hugh W. Ogden, the court-appointed auditor, issued his final findings in 1925. The tank had been poorly designed from the start, never pressure tested before it was filled, and USIA had received multiple structural warnings they simply ignored.
What did poorly designed mean specifically in Ogden's findings? Was this a materials failure, an engineering failure, or both?
Both. The steel walls were too thin for a tank that size holding a fluid that dense, and the riveted seams weren't rated for the thermal expansion cycles. The tank went through every winter. Ogden's ruling landed USIA with roughly $628,000 in damages paid out to victims and families.
6 years of litigation, 3,000 witnesses, and it ended with, "Your tank was bad and you knew it." That's a very expensive way to learn something the neighborhood kids already knew.
The kids literally collecting leaking molasses off the tank walls. That detail keeps coming back. If that was visible to children on the street, how did USIA maintain in court that the structure was sound?
They didn't maintain it was sound. They just blamed anarchists instead of admitting liability. Ogden saw through both moves.
Okay, so here is where it gets interesting for our purposes. What actually fed the conspiracy angle?
Oral tradition mostly. In the years after the disaster, persistent stories circulated in Boston's North End that the molasses had contained undisclosed additives, fermentation accelerants, industrial chemicals, something that made it more volatile than standard molasses. The theory was that USIA had been cutting corners on the product grade itself.
Is there any contemporaneous document, a supplier invoice, a lab analysis, a customs manifest, that mentions anything other than standard molasses?
Nothing. Not one piece of forensic evidence or period documentation. This is entirely oral history passed down through the neighborhood. The claim survives because it feels right. The company was cutting corners everywhere else, so why not the product itself? But feeling right and being supported by evidence are different things.
It's the conspiracy theory that makes total sense and has zero receipts, which is honestly the most relatable kind.
So if standard molasses can do all that damage on its own, is there any actual reason to suspect additives from a physics standpoint?
That's exactly what MIT looked at for the 2019 centennial. A team modeled the fluid dynamics of the wave and found the molasses behaved as a non-Newtonian fluid, meaning it thickened under stress rather than flowing freely. That property alone explains why victims couldn't move once submerged, and why rescuers had such difficulty pulling people out. The more you struggled, the denser it got around you.
Non-Newtonian thickening under stress. That's the same property as quicksand. You fight it, you sink faster.
So it wasn't poison, it was physics. The molasses was just doing what molasses does, at industrial scale, at 35 miles an hour. No secret ingredients required. Nature provided the nightmare for free.
That's the MIT conclusion, yes. And it closes the door on the additive theory from a scientific angle without needing any corporate document. Standard industrial molasses, in those quantities, at that temperature swing, behaves exactly as catastrophically as what witnesses described.
Calm, all right, here is where things land. Confirmed, Ogden's 1925 verdict is unambiguous. The tank was structurally deficient and UCA knew it. Confirmed, the anarchist bomb defense was a fabrication constructed to exploit Red Scare politics. And it was rejected on the evidence.
Also confirmed, the rapid cleanup, hosing everything into the harbor, genuinely did destroy physical evidence. That part of the conspiracy narrative isn't wrong. It's just that the evidence it destroyed was evidence of structural failure, not secret ingredients.
So the cover-up people suspected was real. They just had the wrong thing being covered up. UCA wasn't hiding poison. They were hiding negligence.
Which, for the victims, is arguably the more enraging answer.
The secret ingredients story speculated. No forensic basis, no document trail, no period corroboration. It's a folk narrative that grew into the vacuum left when the physical scene was gone and the litigation dragged on for 6 years behind closed doors.
Morgan, you said earlier the cleanup was documented publicly by the Globe. Does that actually cut against a cover-up? Or does publicly documented chaos still leave room for selective erasure?
It cuts against a coordinated cover-up. What it doesn't prevent is incidental evidence loss. When you're hosing molasses into a harbor for public health reasons, you're not thinking about preserving a forensic scene. The result looks the same either way. That ambiguity is exactly why the oral tradition filled the gap.
What this disaster illustrates is a specific psychological pattern. When corporate negligence is confirmed, when we know a company ignored warnings, lied in court, and paid out damages, it sometimes isn't enough. The story still wants a bigger villain. Poison in the tank, sabotage, secret chemistry, as if ordinary greed at the cost of 21 lives needs to be made more monstrous to feel proportionate.
It's like the facts of the case are too boring to carry the weight of 21 people dying. So the story adds something extra to make it feel like enough of a reason.
There is a term for this in disaster sociology: proportionality bias. The scale of an outcome leads people to assume an equivalent scale of cause. A tank full of molasses doesn't feel like a sufficient explanation for that much death, so the explanation inflates.
And UCS behavior fed it. They did lie. They did destroy evidence, even incidentally. They blamed immigrants. Every actual bad faith move they made became fuel for the belief that there was something worse underneath.
The cover-up being real, even a cover-up of something mundane, is basically the origin story for every conspiracy that follows. You can't unring that bell. If you want more deep dives like this one, real events, real evidence, actual corporate malfeasance you didn't know happened, we are here every week. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss what's coming.
The bottom line on this one: a company built a bad tank, ignored the warnings, watched children lick the leaks off the walls, and then blamed Italian anarchists in court. The negligence was real. The cover-up was real. The poison was not.
21 people, 2 million gallons, and the most expensive lesson in Boston history about what good enough engineering costs.
If this story stuck with you, the 2019 centennial coverage from the Boston Globe and the MIT Fluid Dynamics study are both worth tracking down. They're the two pieces that actually updated what we know about this event, rather than just retelling it.
Next week, we are going after chemtrails, the white lines aircraft leave across the sky. Some say it's condensation. Others say aluminum, barium, and a population control program. We will look at the actual atmospheric chemistry, the declassified weather modification programs that genuinely do exist, and why this particular theory has more staying power than almost anything else in the modern conspiracy canon. Don't miss it.
And if you want to be there when we find out whether the government is actually crop dusting us, which after this episode, I am putting at maybe 30% likely. Subscribe and hit the bell. We will be here.